Hello everyone, welcome to Tech Fortitude, and today in this video we're going to see how to create a backend API using Python Flask. And not only that, we're going to protect that API using API keys. Yes, we're going to generate our own API keys with the program. This video is going to be a full-fledged walkthrough on developing the backend API program, creating the key and hashing it, and accessing the API from another program with that key. And yeah, so without any further ado, let's get started. So we'll be creating two programs. One will be server and the other one will be the client. So the server will be creating the API keys, and as well as it has all the endpoints for the clients to send request. And the client, on the other hand, will be sending the request from the API key generated by the server. And since we're gonna generate an API key, I'm gonna show you how you can hash the API key to make it even more secure. So now let's just start the coding part. Now we need to install Flask on our VS Code. So open up a terminal and type pip install Flask. Alright, so let's start by importing Flask. Okay, now I have imported all the required libraries. So basically we're going to create a notes application, a simple notes application for the sake of this video. So now let's start the server point. So now let's create a simple empty list and note ID counter. I'll make it to 1. API keys db is equal to also we're gonna store the API keys as hashes on all. We're not gonna store it as simple strings. All right, now let's go ahead and create a function, and in the function I'm gonna add the parameters prefix. Now we're gonna create a function to salt the generated API key. So what's salting anyway? So salting is like we're gonna add some random dummy values into the API key before hashing it, so it makes it even more secure. So let's start that. So for salting, let's create a new function and create salt. And let's just simply return os.urandom, and 16 is good. Now let's go ahead and create the hash API key, and for that we have to create the function for that. Now let's go ahead and create a function to verify the created API. Return false. That's it. Now we're gonna create the authentication so that the API can only be accessed with the correct API key, and we cannot access it directly without API key. We also posted a Python basic crash course video on our channel. You can check it out from the I button over there. So it's a full-fledged tutorial for Python. Now we have created all the required functions for our program, but since this is a backend program, we need to create endpoints for the client program to access. So first let's create the default home root for our backend. Now let's go ahead and create the root for public, which is defined over here. Now let's create the root for creating the API key. So this is going to be an admin root. So for that, add app. Let's go and create the protected endpoints, which means you'll be accessing that only through the API key, and without the prior API key permission, you can't access these roots. Now the server code is ready. Now let's proceed by running the server to see whether it runs. Python server.py. Alright, we have an error. So this error is occurring because Flask is using the endpoint name and the function name as the same value, which means our decorator returns a function called wrapper every time. So now we need to fix the clash by replacing our decorator with this import from functools, import wraps, and then the wrapper. Now let's run the server, and there we go. Now our server is running. If you click here, you can see the message is displaying. API is running, which means our API is working. Now what we're gonna do here is we're gonna create the client code as well, and we're gonna access the server from the client. Alright, so now we're gonna create the client code. So let's get started. So let's create a new Python file called as client.py, and in this it's going to be very simple. So import requests, and the base URL will be, no, not this, https 127.0.0.1 5000. Yep. And let's create a function def get API key. Now let's create a function to get the notes. Let's create another function to create the notes. So this is going to be the admin part, which means this is not in the public directory. You have to have the correct API key in order for this to work. So create note. Alright, the snippet is correct, so let's have that. Now sprint requesting new API key, and so let's have that. Now we need to install the request library. So script install requests. Done. So now let's run the server part. So Python server.py, and our backend is working. Let's create a new terminal and run our client. Bye. I like to have it in the side as well. Right, so Python client.py. Okay, so we have an error. Alright, so the errors occurring because we're calling the HTTPS on a HTTP server. So that's the reason. So now let's restart the server and restart the client, and there we go. So here we can see we have received an API key, and this API key right here is salted, and as well as it's hashed. And with that API key we're getting the notes and the status of it, of the communication, and we create a new node, and with that we have the response from the server as well. And coming back to the server, we can see we have got a get request at this timestamp, and the server replied at the same timestamp with this endpoint right here. So this is how you create your own API with API key and secure it as well. Now let's see what happens if we call the nodes which requires the API key without the correct API configuration, which means the authentication from the server. So it's right over here. So we're gonna call this endpoint directly. So let's open up our terminal, and with that I want to type curl http://127.0.0.1 5000/nodes. Now we get an error because API key is missing, and here we can see that we have got a get request, but the server did not responded any output. So this is a perfect learning demo, but in real apps you must add some production ready things like a database storage and a key revocation and rotation, a key expiry, rate limiting, and of course HTTPS. And yeah, so this is how you create your own API and access it with your own API key. So now we have seen what an API is and how to create your own API using Python and access that API with an API key, and of course protect the API key by salting and of course hashing. And I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give a like, share and subscribe to Tech Fortitude, and I'll see you guys in my next video.